Welcome to the Wired for Success podcast, your show for ambitious, mission-driven entrepreneurs who want to build million-dollar businesses without sacrificing their health, relationships, or happiness, who understand that in order to build their empire, they need a solid foundation, and that the more they are thriving, the more their business is thriving too. This show brings you the very best from science, self-development, and entrepreneurship to set you up for sustainable success. Hi, I'm Claudia Garbutt, the scientist turned mindset and high-performance coach for entrepreneurs, and I help you get wired for success. Now, before we dive into today's episode, I want to share something that has been an absolute game changer for me lately. As you might know, all your behavior is driven by two main components, your physiology and your psychology. So if your body is run down because you eat crappy food, you don't exercise, and you don't sleep, well, you can't really expect to deliver your best work. So that's the physiology part. Think of it as the engine that enables your work. If you don't take good care of that engine, it will break down eventually. On the other hand, even if you eat a healthy diet and you exercise 5 times a week, but you're constantly feeling anxious, overwhelmed, and you just can't break free from your negative thought spirals, again, you won't be able to deliver your best work. That's the psychology part of the equation. So whenever you're trying to create a profound shift in your state or a lasting change in your behavior, you will want to look at those two main components and figure out how to nudge them in the right direction. Both parts are essential and they are linked by intricate feedback loops, so you want to make sure you pay attention to both parts. But sometimes, one of them is just so much easier to nudge in the direction that you want it to go, and it therefore makes sense to start there. So let me illustrate what I mean by giving you an example. You know those days when you just can't seem to get into the groove? You're trying to focus, you're trying to be productive, but something is just not clicking. Yeah, I've been there too. A couple of months ago, I noticed that my energy levels were kind of low and I had a hard time concentrating during the day. And I wasn't quite sure what was going on. I hadn't really made any big changes to my routines. And I thought, well, it might just be a winter thing induced by, not enough sunlight or something. And funnily enough, that was about the time when the guys from Magic Mind reached out to me because they were interested in a collaboration. Now, if you run a top podcast, you get lots of emails from people who want something from you. So in the beginning, I was a little standoffish. I mean, who are those guys? To be honest, I hadn't heard of Magic Mind before. So I did a little digging and discovered that Magic Mind is the world's first productivity drink. And it has acquired quite a big following and lots of amazing testimonials from happy customers. Well, next, I had a look at the ingredients. And it sounded really good. A great mix of ingredients that support your energy metabolism and ingredients that help your body reduce stress. What can I say? It looked legit. And I mean, Joe Rogan had it on his podcast and the Kardashians are drinking it. You can't ask for more in terms of credibility, right? So the fact that they were interested in a collaboration was kind of flattering, but still, I hadn't tried their product for myself and I wasn't going to promote something that I hadn't tried myself. Since they got me curious, I agreed to test the product to see what I think about it. Now, you can either drink it alongside your morning coffee or you replace your morning coffee with it. I decided to drink it alongside my morning cup of joe. Now, call me a skeptic, but despite the hype, I didn't really expect to notice much. What I noticed pretty quickly, though, was the promised increase in energy level, which was awesome, especially since it wasn't like the coffee high that often makes me jittery and nervous because I'm quite sensitive to caffeine. It was more of a longer lasting energy boost without the caffeine crash. And after drinking it every morning for 4 days, I noticed an additional benefit. I felt alert, but very calm at the same time. Now that's awesome, right? I had an important interview that day and a lot of stressful things going on in my personal life, things that had me worried that I would not be able to focus and concentrate during the interview. But to my surprise, I was able to stay calm and focused, and the interview went really, really well. Phew! It's like my mind is clearer, sharper, and I'm ready to tackle whatever the day throws at me. So that's awesome. And honestly, being alert and calm is the best state you can be in if you would like to increase your productivity. That's the sweet spot of nervous system activation that you want to aim for. because this is where the magic happens, when you have enough energy and you can focus it. Because that's very important too, right? If you have a ton of energy, but you can't focus that energy, then you're just bouncing all over the place like a toddler on a sugar high. Now, what's the magic inside this little magic shot, you might ask? Well, let me break it down for you. So, Magic Mind is packed with all natural ingredients sourced from the best suppliers out there. We're talking about matcha for extended release caffeine, Bacopa monnieri for improved attention span and memory, ashwagandha for reduced stress and anxiety, and so much more. It's like a powerhouse of goodness in every sip. So that clearly was a case where it was easier to shift my state in the desired direction by going down the physiology route. And all it took was the addition of a delicious shot to my morning routine. Don't you just love those easy fixes? I wouldn't be sharing this with you if I didn't truly believe in this product. Magic Mind has been a game changer for me, and I know it can do the same for you. Whether you're a busy parent, an entrepreneur, or just someone looking to boost their productivity, Magic Mind has got you covered. I'm super proud that they decided to partner with me and sponsor this episode. If you want to experience the magic for yourself, you can get it at magicmind.com/wiredfs. That's magicmind.com/WIREDFS. And if you use the code WIREDFS20, again, that's WIREDFS20, you can get up to 56% off your first subscription or 20% off a one-time purchase. Trust me, it's worth it. And by the way, if you want to make the most out of this discount code, get the 30-pack because it's the best value. They're also one of the few companies with a 100% money-back guarantee, no questions asked. There's really no risk. So if you don't like it, they will just refund in 3 to 4 hours. Now, without further ado, let's dive into today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the Wired for Success podcast, where we talk about all things science, self-development, and entrepreneurship that help you get to that next level of success in your life and business. My guest today is the CEO of Flipstick, Akeem Shannon. From a college dropout to CEO of a top 50 fastest growing consumer brand, Akeem has shared his story from stages such as Shark Tank to the walls of the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History. So interesting. And through his journey, navigating mental health, marketing, management, and motivation, the 4 M's, he has lived a story that has inspired thousands. And I'm a sucker for a good inspirational story, so I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Welcome, Akeem, and thank you so much for being on my show today.
Thank you for having me, Claudia. I'm very excited.
Me too. Now, Akeem, for those who don't know you yet, can you share a little bit about yourself and your entrepreneurial journey with us? Like, how did you end up doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, so like many people, it was a long journey to get here. Honestly, it was a long journey even to get to the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey. You kind of mentioned earlier that I was a college dropout, and that was a huge transformative moment in my life. I in high school, I had performed well enough that I got a full scholarship to go to Howard University in Washington, D.C., to study chemical engineering of all things.
Ooh.
And to be honest, I had no business in chemical engineering because I hated chemistry. But I had read an article that told me, hey, chemical engineers will be the highest paid career field in the next 10 years. So I said, okay, I'm going to do that. Bad idea because I failed miserably, lost my scholarship, and had to come home from school. And it was a really tough time in my life. I mean, I was at one of the lowest points ever because I just felt so ashamed, that I had squandered, at least felt like I had squandered this amazing opportunity. And so when I got home, I had to make a decision. I was either going to be, a deadbeat, my parents' basement, or I was going to turn it around. And so I made myself this promise that by the time my friends graduated from university, I wanted to be making as much as the average college graduate. So I got to work. I started working in a retail store, selling cell phones and cell phone accessories. Eventually worked in a call center, selling fiber optic services. And these are both Fortune 500 companies. And so over the course of about 4 years, I became the number one sales rep at both of those organizations. And I ended up saving about $100,000 and was making a close to six figures by the time my friends graduated. And, without that recovery going from really, really low to really, really high, I don't even think it would have been possible for me to eventually leave my career and start my own business. But that was really like the first time that I faced what felt like insurmountable failure, and then was able to turn it around into some sort of success.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, what a great story of determination and resilience. Now, have those qualities always been a part of your personality, or were those kind of like skills that you had to develop during your journey?
That's a great question. I'm not sure if they always were, to be honest. Like, I feel like when I was younger, maybe they were there and I just didn't believe I had them. Maybe that's really what happened, because something very similar happened to me in high school. I remember I had a scholarship to go to high school because I went to a private high school. And I lost my scholarship then too. You see a pattern here. And so in high school, I had this admissions director, Miss Gibbons, and she loved me so much. And so I remember when I lost my scholarship, I went into her office. I was like, Miss Gibbons, oh my gosh, we get kicked out of school. I was like, can you please help me? And so Miss Gibbons kind of moved some numbers around so that I wouldn't lose my scholarship for an extra semester. She's like, you have to get your grades up. She's like, I'm telling your parents. And my parents were all upset. And so I was able to recover and really focus and get my grades up, so much so that I was able to earn the scholarship to college. And so, I have always failed and recover, but I don't think, at least then, I didn't see any value in the failure. It was just like, you're bad. This is something that you should be ashamed of, that you should hide. Your parents are upset. And I didn't realize that I could learn through those failures. I just saw them as, hey, an F on a test is bad. There's no redeeming qualities here. It's nothing to learn. You just messed up. And so I think what I learned through that experience was, no, there's a learning opportunity that's here. If you accept it. And if you don't, you're going to have to learn the lesson again, and it'll be worse the next time.
Yes, exactly. That's just, you just have to repeat the pattern until you understand the message.
That's exactly right.
Now, I always say that entrepreneurship is kind of like the biggest self-development journey that you can be on. What has your journey taught you about yourself so far?
Well, so I think the determination piece is huge, right? Like, that really has been what's allowed me to get to where I am today. So, after I kind of recovered from, college, and, I ended up being a top sales rep at the company's called Verizon. And eventually I'm like, I realized like I wasn't fulfilled anymore, right? Even though I was successful in this job, I wasn't happy in the job anymore. And I quit. I said, all right, it's time for me to do something else. And I wanted to start a business immediately. I knew, like, I want to be in charge of my own destiny. But to be honest, I was still afraid. And so the moment another opportunity came along to have a comfortable job, I took it. And so I ended up working at a company called Square, who makes the popular app Cash App. And I always wanted to work for a tech company. And so here I am, maybe 9 months into my entrepreneurial journey, really hadn't got started, and I start working at another company. But about a year into it, the same feelings came. And now I'm working at the best company I've ever been at. I got all these perks, unlimited vacation. I have catered lunches every day. I mean, everything you could want for in a job, but I'm not fulfilled. And I was thankful at the time that I recognized it, because in the past, when I felt unfulfilled, I just thought there's something wrong with me and just get over it. Not realizing, like, no, this is my body, right? And my spirit really trying to tell me, like, hey, where we're at right now may have been where we were supposed to be once upon a time, but it's not where we're supposed to be today. And so I listened this time. And luckily, I had a boss who also listened. And when I told him, yeah, I think it's just time for me to go do my own thing, He gave me a book called The Alchemist.
Mm-hmm.
And for those who have not read it, you may know, but for those who have not read it, The Alchemist is about this boy who goes on this journey to find his treasure. And early on in his journey, he has a dream about this treasure. And he then meets a wise man that tells him he has to go after this dream and that he'll find omens or signs along the way that will help him in this journey. And, I had no intention of reading this book when I got it. Okay. Only reason I know that is the book eventually chased me down. I kept hearing about the book again and again and again. And eventually I read the book. And man, it was life changing for me because it showed me like, the fulfillment that I desire is out there. And I know where it is. I'm just not chasing it down. I'm not going after it. And it was with that mindset that I get a late night phone call from my uncle, who's an engineer at NASA. And he was telling me about a project he was working on for the Space Launch System that was going to use this gecko-based adhesive to allow him to lay wiring behind paneling, and the wiring would stick to this adhesive. And I had recently mounted my TV on the wall and just could not stop thinking about the fact that if I had this adhesive, I could have much more easily stuck my TV on the wall
Mm-hmm.
rather than figure out a way to mount it. And it was with that mindset that eventually I'd never mounted a TV on the wall, but I did figure out a way to mount a tiny TV, a smartphone, onto the wall using this synthetic seat adhesive. And that's where the idea for Flipstick was born. A little device that goes on the back of your phone that allows you to mount it to any flat surface so you can do hands-free streaming, hands-free TikTok videos, Instagram reels, photos, etc. And man, when you say exercise of resilience and not giving up, I mean, it's been incredibly difficult. But here's the other thing. I also truly believe in inspired action. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that when you take that inspired action versus just the hustle, hustle, grind, 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 you find that the universe conspires to meet you where you are. And as you start to take those steps, one step at a time, man, the right people start to come into your life. You see things in places that you never saw them before. You go to places and conferences and events that you never would have been at. And all of a sudden, things just start coming together that make it easier for you to take this journey rather than more difficult.
Yeah, that's so true. It's so funny how when you have the right mindset, then you
Mm,
start seeing the breadcrumbs everywhere. It's like the
mm.
universe leaves some breadcrumbs out there for you, and you just have to find the trail.
That is so true. You just got to find the trail. And sometimes, you're on a path and the breadcrumbs are down the path, but the breadcrumbs veer off into the grass. But you're on the path and you're like, and then it starts getting tough. You're like, wait a minute, I don't think I'm in the right place. You got to back up a little bit and then you got to go off the beaten path. Even though it seems like that shouldn't be the way you're supposed to go, it is the way you're supposed to go. And that's where the breadcrumbs are leading you.
Yeah, it's so funny. Now, if you're looking into the future, what are you working towards in terms of personal development? So, what does the
Mm.
best version of you look like?
I've had an incredible journey thus far, right? I was able to take this business, start it with nothing, knowing no one, and scale it up past seven figures, be able to get onto things like Shark Tank, and
So
I
cool.
convinced Snoop Dogg that I was a branding genius, and got into over 3,000 different retail stores, did the live shopping networks, all kinds of cool stuff. And you know, from the outside looking in, it would just look like, oh, it's just an overnight success. It was on Shark Tank, it blew up overnight, easy peasy. But it hasn't been that way, right? There's been times where I was scammed out of $10,000 by people saying they could get me investors, and times where I was faced with $100,000 shipping bills that I didn't know
Mhm.
how I was gonna pay for them. Times where I was severely depressed and paralyzed with anxiety, and it hasn't always been an easy road. And so I think for me, the future is telling the full story because so often we only get the glossed over, pretty picture of what success looks like. And that's just simply not true. And if you believe it's true, when you hit the setbacks and you hit the roadblocks that slow you down, that set you back 10 paces, well, you would think, oh, well, this is not for me. I should give up now. And my goal is to tell people, hey, look, it may not be easy, but it is possible. And it's a lot of fun. But it doesn't mean that it won't be difficult. There won't be challenges, because there absolutely will be. But those challenges and those storms are really just lessons. They're lessons and opportunities to learn, to really take you where it is that you truly want to be. And so for me, it's sharing my journey and the story that I've had, so that other people realize, hey, look, if this knucklehead could do it, I can do it too. Trust me. Like, if I can do it, you can too. And most importantly, it's worth doing it. It's a lot of fun. I've been able to be in so many rooms with so many cool people that I never thought I would be in the room with. Like you mentioned earlier about the Smithsonian Museum, which you had a very surprised look on your face when you said that. But I also had a surprised look on my face when they reached out to me. So
Yeah.
I remember, for those who don't know, international audience, the Smithsonian Museum is the largest museum system in the world, and it's the National Museum of the United States in Washington, D.C. And so the Museum of Natural History, which is just one of the many museums they have, they had an exhibit that they wanted to do on the history of cell phones and how elements and material sciences and all this kind of stuff goes into cell phones, and how cell phones have just transformed the world. And so they have this huge exhibit called Cell Phone Unseen Connections. And I get an email from the curator of the museum saying, hey, we want you in this exhibit at the Smithsonian Museum. I'll be honest, I thought it was a scam, because I'm like, what are you talking about? You want me in the exhibit? And so, as it would turn out, we go to, they do want me in the exhibit. And I take my whole family, my fiance, my mom, my dad, up to Washington, D.C., the same city where I lost my college scholarship, right? And we go to the museum. We're at this big gala. And to the left of me is the woman who invented text messages, okay? She invented cell phone data.
Woo!
And to the right of me is the CEO of Qualcomm, who makes every microchip in phones. And then there's me. I'm just like, I think they have me seated at the wrong table. I don't know. I feel like I was supposed to be here. But it was one of those things. I asked the curator, why me? Why am I here? And he was like, look, creating, cell phones is amazing, and microchips and all that stuff's amazing. He's like, but we have millions of children that walk through this building every year. And they come and they look at these exhibits. And the most important job that we have is to inspire those children to make history. And if we make history seem inaccessible, like only the most brilliant people in the world can be a part of history, well, then we really haven't done our jobs. Our jobs is to inspire people to be a part of history. And we think that that's what your story does. And so that's why we included you as part of the exhibit. And it was just, man, what a full circle moment, because I remember the last time I was in that museum, it was because I wasn't going to class, and I couldn't go to class because I was on academic probation. And now, fast forward all these years later, they got my story in the museum. And it was just one of those things where it's like, man, it hasn't been an easy road, but I never would imagine cool stuff like this happening to me. So, and man, when I tell you, my mom, the smile on her face, she was talking to everybody. I had to tell her to stop talking to people because she was just so excited. And I remember asking her, I was like, hey, Mom, you still think I should go back to college? And she was like, oh, maybe not now. So, yeah, I mean, for me, the future is definitely sharing my story, so that other people go and chase their dreams, because really you owe it to the future generations to create the product or the service, or to create the life story that you're meant to live. And you really owe it also to yourself. Because, man, I remember when I was working at Verizon, I went through this huge mental crisis. And it all started when I was watching a movie with Liam Neeson. And he goes, it's not your life that flashes before your eyes when you die. It's the remembering of all the regrets that you have. And it filled me with this overwhelming sense of anxiety, because I realized that if I was doing in 20 years what I was doing then, if I was in the same place in my life in 20 years as I was then, I'd be filled with regret. And I wish that on no one. to die or be on their deathbed and feel like I did not live my life to the absolute fullest. And so my goal is, hey, let you know, like, it's not as scary as you think. It's totally possible. You can do it, and you'll have a lot of fun along the way.
I love it. That's such an important message. And thank you so much for sharing. Now, I'm super curious, like, when you make decisions, how much of your decisions would you say is based on just trusting your gut versus your rational mind?
You know, over the years, it's shifted. It used to be all rational. It's like, that doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to do that. But once things start working out, when you follow your gut, right, and you have that inspired action, you start realizing, maybe I should listen to that feeling, that whisper inside that's telling me to do something. Now, I'll give you an example. I applied to be on Shark Tank, right? And I get past 40,000 contestants to the final round, down to 250 people, from 40,000 down to 250. And they're like, okay, Akeem, you're so close to getting on the show. We just got to get it down to 120 people, and you'll be on the show. And guess what? I didn't make the cut. I did not get onto the show. And so I had to come up with another solution. And I start going to different events, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's next? My website wasn't making any sales. I really didn't have things figured out, and I was running out of money. And so through the grapevine, I hear about this event called the Revolt Summit. And it was a music and entertainment conference. Now, I'm in consumer products. I'm not in music. I'm not in entertainment. I have no business being there. But inside of me, I knew I needed to go. And I found out they were having a pitch competition. And billionaire rapper Sean Diddy Combs was throwing this event. And I was like, I have to be there because I'm going to convince him to invest in my business. So I pay for a ticket, plane ticket, VIP ticket to the event, rent a car, all this kind of stuff. And I find out a couple days after I buy my ticket that the pitch competition's closed. And they are not accepting any more people to pitch. Now, the rational mind would have been like, all right, let me try to get a refund on my plane ticket. Let me try to get a refund on this event, and I'll try something else. But no, I knew I needed to be at the event. And so I found out that there was a music competition, and they were going to be giving away a record deal. So I said, well, I took Mr. Karpowitz's music appreciation class. So I am going to write a rap about my business Flipstick, and I'm going to enter the music competition to win a record deal to be able to pitch my business. And that was a plan I had. Now, that is an irrational plan, okay? It should never work. It makes no sense. And I knew it didn't make sense. That's why I didn't tell anybody. I was like, I'm not going to tell people about this plan. This makes no sense at all. But that was my plan. So I go down. The event was in Atlanta, Georgia. I go to Atlanta. I go to the event, and I'm facing adversity every step of the way. I get there, and I find out I was supposed to submit a video or I won't even be able to audition for the competition. So I have to scramble and get a video done like 20 minutes before it was due. Then I find out the next day I get in the competition. I perform. They love it. They put me in the top 5, and then they disqualify me because they say I wasn't a serious, real artist. I didn't want a record deal. I was just trying to pitch my business. And so they disqualified me from the competition. But I refused to give up. My mindset told me I was meant to be here. This opportunity is for me, and I will make the opportunity that exists here. And so there was a comedy show right before the final music competition. And so during the comedy show, something inside of me, right, that intuition just said, stand up. So I stood up. I held my product in the air, and the comedian looked at me, and he used very colorful language. I don't know if I'm allowed to curse here, so I'll just clean it up here. But he was like, bro, what are you trying to sell me? And I go full pitch mode. I'm telling him this is the Flipstick. He can stick it to this. He can stick it to this. He starts cracking jokes about all the inappropriate places he'd like to stick the Flipstick. And all of a sudden, he eventually lets me on the stage during his comedy routine and allows me to perform my rap in front of the whole audience. They eat it up. And eventually the same person that disqualified me runs up, takes me backstage. I mean, all these famous people, DJ Khaled is there. All these rappers are there. And eventually the organization would buy a ton of flip sticks, invite me out to Los Angeles, where they had their next event, gave away flip sticks at that event. At that event, I meet Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg ends up falling in love with the flip stick. And between the two of them, they get me on Shark Tank, and just with a phone call. And it was one of those things where, man, I did something totally irrational, that should never make sense on paper, but it worked. It worked because I believed in it, and I followed those breadcrumbs right off the beaten path, into the grass, into the woods, through the trees, through the dirt, and got to the destination. It was a shortcut. And, I'm a big believer in finding shortcuts. And for me, usually once or twice a year, there's a huge opportunity that transforms and propels me forward way further than I could have gotten from hard work alone. And if I keep my eyes open, and my heart open to those opportunities, then they find me. And when I take advantage of them, man, game changer.
Yeah, I love that. Sometimes when we encounter those obstacles, they are really just like the detour for they redirect you to the shortcut you didn't even know exists. People get so upset about those obstacls, but sometimes we really have to ask ourselves, what are they protecting us from? We are running against this wall, but they are protecting us from something. So,
man, and you know what? This is just the fact that they're protecting us from something. It took me a long time to realize that, right? That sometimes storms blow you off course. You think they're blowing you off course, but they blew you on course. And without the storm, man, you would have ended up in the totally wrong place. And, now when I look at things, when I put my everything into it, and I think, man, this is what I'm supposed to do, and I'm following my omens and believing I can do it, and it doesn't work out, I know, no, that was meant to happen. Because now I get to tell that story, and I told that story to Shark Tank, and it was the story that got me on the show. It was the story that closed all the deals with the retailers. Telling that story of resilience and meeting Snoop Dogg and rapping and all this kind of stuff to get on Shark Tank, I wouldn't even be invited to speak at a lot of places if it wasn't for that story. And I found that I love telling that story. It's one of my favorite stories to tell. And it wouldn't even have happened if I had gotten on Shark Tank. Let alone what I didn't realize was that a year later, we'd be in a worldwide pandemic. Mm-hmm. And the only reason my business survived the pandemic is because during the pandemic, we were on Shark Tank. And if it had happened a year prior, all that momentum that went into being on Shark Tank could have been erased, because I would have went into a pandemic after that big bump versus having that big bump during the pandemic. And so, man, the timing just ended up being perfect.
Yeah, so many challenges in our lives just make sense when we look back at them. They don't make sense at the time, but sometimes, someday in the future, they might make perfect sense.
Man, it's so true.
And I think the more complex and multi-layered a problem is that we face, the more likely it is that the subconscious mind, aka your gut feeling, will actually help you make the right decision, because your subconscious mind has a much higher capacity to integrate this vast amount of information, and your conscious mind really has a very limited bandwidth and working memory. And I think, that said, I think that fears and unresolved trauma can severely derail your gut instinct, because your survival is always your body's number one priority, and your body's alarm bells will always drown out any other hunches. And that's why I think that the inner work is so important, especially for ambitious, mission-driven entrepreneurs. So how do you think about it? And have you ever had any experiences where your gut instinct has actually led you astray?
Man, absolutely. But I think it was the misunderstanding of my gut instinct. Because of the trauma in the past, I didn't know what the feeling felt like. I didn't know the difference between a warning feeling and a no, go do this feeling, because they're kind of similar, right? They both have a little bit of nerves tied to them, but they're not the same. And
Mm-hmm.
it took me a while to understand the difference between the two. And I want to back up a little bit before I get into a time where that did happen to me. It's back up to a time where I didn't feel my gut feeling at all. And that was because, like you said, the survival instinct was the only feeling that was there. As I mentioned earlier about that time when I watched a Liam Neeson movie, right? And I had this
Mm-hmm.
overwhelming sense of anxiety about regret. Well, it wasn't just that night. That anxiety, and it was gut wrenching, just shredding anxiety. It stayed with me every day for weeks. I could not shake it. Got to the point where I had insomnia for almost 10 days. Did not sleep 1 minute for over a week. I was terrified. I thought I was going to die because I'm like, if I can't sleep, I'm feeling terrible every day. I don't know what's wrong with me. And eventually, I went to go see a therapist. I'd never been to therapy a day in my life. I went to go see a therapist at the request of my boss, who realized something was majorly wrong with me. And I went to go see her. I'm like, hey, yeah, I just think I got a little work stress. No big deal. Probably just need a little time off work. I was like, by the way, I'm also gay. No one knows. Never told anyone. Not a big deal. Anyway, so work stress is really the problem here. It's the real issue. And she's like, oh, really? And I'm like, yeah, yeah. So if you could just write a note, I appreciate it. She didn't write a note. I went back to work a few more days, still terrible. My boss once again was like, Akeem, you are not well. At the time, I was the number one sales rep in the entire country. So when that person is no longer making sales, something's wrong. And thank God, my boss wasn't the type of person who's like, you just need to work harder and you need to get back on the grind. No, he knew me better than that. And he knew like, no, there's something wrong. And that's why you can't perform. Your creative capacity is being taken up by something else. You got to fix that first. And so he sent me out again, and he's like, "No, you gotta go." And I went back to the therapist. I was like, "She's like, oh, you're back." I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "I think maybe it has something to do with the fact that I'm gay and no one knows that I'm in the closet." She's like, "Oh, you think?" I was like, "Yeah, that's probably what it was." And so I went through this journey of finally, after 22 years of life, coming out to my parents, which is very hard for me to do, but it was the best thing ever for me to do because, man, I hadn't even realized up to that point in my life how much of my mental and emotional capacity was just going towards trying to protect myself and insulate myself from the fear of people knowing the secret that I had about myself. And man, it was just such a burden that was lifted off of me that I never could have imagined. And here was the crazy thing, all the fear that I had about the way people would react and the visceral, my parents would reject me and I would no longer be a good salesperson because people wouldn't like me because I was gay and all of this stuff that I had, it was all fabric. It wasn't true. And in fact, I was far more successful after I was able to lift that burden off of my shoulders. But man, I didn't even, I was not in tune with myself because I wasn't being true to myself. And once I was able to do that, I became so spiritual. I started learning about the law of attraction and spirituality. And prior to this, I was the least spiritual person you can imagine. In fact, I grew up Christian and I hated God because I was like, well, look, they told me that God hates me, so I hate God, or he doesn't exist. Either way, I'm not with any of this spiritual stuff whatsoever. And so once I had this realization, I remember one night I had this profound spiritual experience and I heard God tell me, he's like, you hate me because you think I hate you, but you never asked. And it was just this weight that lifted for me because I'm like, why am I taking other people's opinion of what my personal spirituality should be? And I'm listening to their opinions about myself. That doesn't make any sense. And so once I went on my own personal journey, and I think this is really beyond religion, right? It doesn't matter what you believe in, but it just matters that you choose it for yourself and believe in it for yourself and discover it for yourself rather than let someone else's opinion about what works for them and then put that onto you. And once I was able to start to discover my own path, man, changed everything. Because when I think about the book The Alchemist, If I had read that book with the mindset I had before, it would have meant nothing to me. It would have been absolutely nothing. But because I read it with this mindset of just understanding a little bit about spirituality and understanding about omens and signs, like I was open to the message that it had for me. And it then propelled me to be even more open to these things. And so, once I found that things aren't just black and white, things are vibrational, and there's energies that are moving, and that you can tap into that will help you down this path of success. It changed everything. I remember when I first started Flipstick, I wanted to find a big influencer to help me promote we did a Kickstarter campaign, a pre-order campaign. And I didn't have much money, but I wanted someone big. And I remember I kept hearing about Huntsville. Now, for most of the audience, they probably have no idea what Huntsville is, but I keep hearing about this city called Huntsville. And first, I was trying to film this video, and my partner was telling me, he's like, oh yeah, my grandmother's gonna be in town, and she wants to be in your video. I was like, oh, where's your grandma from? Oh, she's from Huntsville. I said, oh wow, that's funny. Then my mom calls me, and she's like, hey, I'm going to Easter down in Huntsville. You want to come? I said, maybe I do. The uncle I told you about that helped me come up with the idea for Flipstick, well, guess where he lives? He lives in Huntsville. Yeah. And so I keep hearing about Huntsville, and eventually I'm watching a show on Netflix, and it's a space epic, and eventually they have a problem. And normally in these space epics in America, they say, mission control to Houston. Houston, we have a problem. That's the line. But in this movie, they say, mission control to Huntsville. Huntsville, we have a problem. Because, see, in Huntsville, there is a NASA base. But not only that, as it would turn out, this huge influencer family that had over 2 million followers on YouTube that I was desperately trying to get a hold of to create a video for me, whose agent had sent me a bill saying it was going to be $75,000 for them to make a integrated campaign video for me and post it on their YouTube page. Well, it turns out when I checked my email that they lived in Huntsville. And after many emails back and forth and no progress, I sent an email to them, and all it said was visiting Huntsville for Easter. I had no intentions to go down with my mom for Easter to Huntsville. I told her I was too busy. But when I saw this and I kept hearing the name over and over and over, I was like, man, what is going on with Huntsville? And so I send them this message. 5 minutes later, they say, hey, we'd love to meet you. I go down to Huntsville. I meet them at a Starbucks. We sit down. We have a conversation for an hour. And the father tells me, he's like, 3 years ago, I was a minister. And my grandfather was a minister. And I told him the story. It's like 3 years ago, I was a minister. My wife was a teacher. We were working full-time jobs. And he's like, now we have this YouTube channel that our kids are the faces of. And we don't work at all. All we do is use YouTube. And, I know our agent sent you that quote for $75,000. And that is how much we received. They had just done a partnership with the card game Uno. And he's like, but we're going to do a video for you completely for free.
Wow.
And that video ended up having like 3 million views. And no one had ever even heard of Flipstick. We hadn't even launched the Kickstarter campaign. Nothing. Okay. And it was one of those things where it's like, man, the universe had to knock me upside the head telling me about Huntsville is the answer that I'm looking for. And I wasn't listening. And once I finally listened, it was like, oh, wow, look at this. And as I got wiser, I got more in tune where I didn't have to be knocked upside the head so heavily, to realize like, oh, this is the pathway to take. But as I go back, if it wasn't for that initial just lifting of the survival instincts, right, and this base survival level, my spirit couldn't have been, and my instinct, right, it couldn't have been sensitive enough to recognize these things. And one of the things I love about The Alchemist is it talks about omens or signs being out there and how they will guide you towards your treasure. But here's the thing about omens. They're actually nothing at all. You could see an omen every day for the rest of your life and you'll recognize nothing. The omen
Mm-hmm.
only has meaning when you give meaning to it. And, I love what you said, Claudia, because a lot of us have these omens that are in our lives that if we only were in tune and paid attention to them, we could live a life of our dreams, but we're not paying attention. We totally are missing what's been right in front of us all this time. And for me, doing meditation, and really working on myself allowed me to be more in tune with that. And don't get me wrong, I'm not perfect. I still make mistakes. As I mentioned earlier, one time I was having this a lot of anxiety around taking this next step, and I couldn't tell the difference between that feeling in your stomach of like nerves. This like, yes, go and do it. I know it's scary, but go and do it anyway. And whoa, red flags, don't go down this path. And I thought the red flag, don't go down this path feeling was the same as the don't be afraid, go after something that's scary feeling. And I ended up getting scammed to the tune of $10,000, and I barely had it at the time. It really hurt me. But through that lesson of getting scammed out to $10,000, I then understood the difference between the feelings. And 2 years later, when I was in a similar situation, but now $10,000 wasn't on the line, it was $100,000 on the line. I recognized the feeling. I said, you know what? I feel the same way now that I felt then. So I think this deal is not the right deal for me. And I avoided a big, huge mistake because I had faced that mistake earlier and recognized and remembered the lesson that I was taught there.
Right, you learned your lesson. You didn't
Yeah.
have to repeat the pattern.
That one I didn't have to repeat.
Awesome. I love the way you tell stories. Now, you've told your stories a lot of times, and you've told it on stages like Shark Tank. But what have you learned about effective storytelling? Do you have some
Hmm.
tips that you can share with our listeners?
Storytelling is the most powerful tool that you have for anything, right? People used to always ask me, like, well, what's the biggest skill that you would recommend people have? I used to always say sales, right? Because I came from a sales world and sales has always helped me. But then I realized, like, this whole time I haven't really been like, yeah, I've been doing sales, but it really was more significant that was the storytelling was what made the sales work. And whether you're storytelling to get a job, or you're storytelling to sell a product, or you're storytelling to recruit people to come work for you and to help you propel your dreams, or you're storytelling to get in front of more people to tell a story, it all comes down to how you tell your story. And I think that for me, one of the most important factors is the transparency. No one, you've never watched a movie and it's all been rosy, hunky dory, and just fantastic, and nothing ever goes wrong. There's no villain and there's no problems. None of that. No, that doesn't work. People, it's not real, and people can sense it. And when you think about the story of the hero's journey, right, which we're all
Mhm.
on our hero's journey story, there's going to be problems that are faced. There's going to be difficulties that are faced. And when you share those with people, man, it draws them into wanting to be a part of your story. And so what I found was that as I told my story and as my story began to develop, and I didn't just share the positive parts and the success parts of it, but I actually shared the deep, dark parts of it, the parts that put me in the mental hospital when I was with anxiety and all this. When I started telling the true story, like all of a sudden, man, people really wanted to be a part of it because it was like, wow, if he could do it, I can do it. And people start to see themselves in you when you tell your true story to other people and they want to help you. And so when I think about when we landed our first retail distribution deal, which was Target, which is the second largest retailer in the United States, but the first retailer we got into, which never should have happened, it was really because when we met the buyer, I told her my story and she identified with the story. And even though on paper it didn't make sense for her to do a deal with us, right? She could have done a deal with anyone she chose to. but she went out on a limb to help because she wanted to be that next part of that story, right?
Mm.
That she had heard, because she's like, man, if he's done all this, I don't want to stand in his way. I want to help. And so I think that as you move through life, the more vulnerable you can be to share your story, it changes everything. So, when you give, you receive 10 times more than what you give. And so I think that as you're going along your journey, it's so important to make sure that you give as much as you can, because man, one, you get the satisfaction and the enjoyment of helping someone else go along on their journey. Uh, but man, it's always the way that you receive. And I'll just give you a quick example. And generally, like, I don't share a lot of the stories of me giving, because for me, the giving is the reward. And I'm a big believer. I know now it's very popular to get on social media and show yourself handing stuff out to people and all this kind of stuff. But I'm like, look, if that's the way you choose to do it, you've received your reward. It was the views that you got. Okay. That was the return on your giving, was the views. And I'm looking for something a little bit more substantiated. However, I remember when I first started Flipstick, I had joined Big Brothers Big Sisters. And Big Brothers Big Sisters, for those who don't know, is a huge organization in the United States and maybe internationally, where it's a mentorship organization where they pair adults with kids who come usually from single parent households, underprivileged kids, and just as a mentor to hang out with them a few times a month, and to give them mentorship and guidance. And so I got paired with my little brother. His name's Tyrell. At the time, he was 13, I want to say, 13 years old. And I got paired with him literally 2 months before I started Flipstick. Okay. So 2 months before I started my business. And so he got to watch from the very beginning, like, what happened on this journey. And when I first met him, he was a terrible writer. He was failing English. But I remember he wrote a poem and he was so proud of the poem and he got an A on it. But I got to be honest, it was terrible. Okay. It was just filled with grammar mistakes. I was like, these teachers, this is why our school systems are failing. How did this teacher give you an A? And I said, but here's the thing. Even though this writing is not great, I was like, it's clear to me from reading this that there's something that you have to say. You got something you want to say. I was like, but the only way that people are going to understand what it is you have to say is you have to become a better writer. And so we started working on writing, and he got better and he got better, and he started writing more stories. And eventually he tells me he wants to publish a book. And so we go through this whole process. And for his 16th birthday, I paid to get the book published. I got him a business license, filed for an ISBN number, got the book printed up. I made 100 copies of the book, and I gifted this to him on his 16th birthday. And he went on a sale. I paid for 100 copies of the book, but he went on a sale like several thousand copies of this book. Eventually, he took over the whole thing, and he just kept pushing it forward. And this ended up getting him a full scholarship to college because he was a published author. He got to speak at places. Just really saw this shy kid that I had met blossom into this really great human being, and then full of confidence. And being, just showered with praises by teachers and all this kind of stuff. And it was just this amazing feeling. And so I remember this was probably in 2021, when we were trying to get into Target, I needed like $100,000 just to produce the product to sell to Target. And I didn't have the money. And I was looking for investors. And I wasn't having any luck yet. I had no investors yet. And I reached out, or actually what happened was the CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters, she knew this whole story with me and Tyrell. She had introduced me to one of their board members. And I met with this board member for lunch. And we had a good time talking. He invited me over to his house for dinner. Got to meet some of his friends. Done deal. Later on, I meet with him when I'm getting ready to raise money. He's a rich guy. And I'm like, hey, I would love for you to just review my pitch deck. And I'm trying to raise money. I love your opinion. I give him the full pitch. And I said, okay, what do you think? And he's like, yeah, it was okay. I'm like, oh, great. This is terrible. So it's coming up on this day where I have this big pitch meeting. I'm going to have, I had won a grant competition, and they were going to put together all these investors in one room for me to pitch. And I had no investors yet. So I'm like, who's going to want to invest in this business? And I don't have a single investor. And my mentor at the time told me, he said, call him up and ask him to invest. I was like, I don't think he wants to invest. He was not super enthusiastic when I just gave him the pitch. He said, call him up and ask him. Call him up and say, hey, I got this event coming up. I'm looking for some investment. Don't have any investors yet. I really need my first investor. He's like, well, how much are you trying to raise? I was like, I'm trying to raise $1.2 million. He's like, well, how much do you need your first check to be? He's like, well, I'd like to get an investment for $100,000. And he's like, okay. And I was like, what do you mean? Okay. He said, come by my house and pick up the check. I was like, do you want to know like what percentage of the company you're going to own? He's like, just come get the check. And I remember I sent him the terms of everything, and he changed the terms because he told me it wasn't favorable enough for me. And it was one of those things where he did not invest. He could care less about the business, to be honest. He didn't invest about the business. He never showed up to a single investor meeting, nothing. He invested because I had helped Tyrell, and that was an organization that he cared about. And he invested for that reason and that reason alone. And look, I'm not saying if you go out and you help someone's going to give you $100,000 3 years later. That's not what I'm saying. But that's what happened. Okay. And I didn't do it with the intention of that happening or anything like that. But for me, that's how the universe works. When you give something to someone, just out the kindness of your heart, not expecting anything in return, man, will the universe come back and give it to you? In that case, it wasn't even tenfold. It was like 1,000-fold. You know what I'm saying? It was just such an overwhelming abundance gift that was given to me just because of the way I had moved through the world. And so when you're on your journey, move through the world in a way that you can be proud of, because like I said, you always get what you give.
That was another example of a perfect storytelling. So thank you so much for that. And I think one of the main elements of telling a really good story is getting the emotion right, getting the listeners to connect with the emotion. Because if we can get the audience to share the feeling that we would like to communicate, then I think that's when the stories really resonate with them. So how do you think about the role of emotion in storytelling?
I think it's huge. Like, because I can very vividly remember how I felt in certain moments. And when I'm watching a movie, like I feel the way that the character in the movie feels. Oh, speak of the devil, that's my little brother from Big Brothers Big Sisters right there. He called me 3 times, which is why I went through the do not disturb. Sorry. So, I think that the emotion is really what connects us, right, as human beings. And it's not just the emotion in the storytelling that I want people to feel, but I'm a true believer that when you're trying to project out a future outcome, you also need to feel the same emotion in the moment now as you will feel in the future when you achieve whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And putting yourself in that emotional state allows you to see those signs and omens that will help you get to that state. And so when I meditate, I want to feel that emotion for the future. And that makes it very important that when I want other people to really connect with what I'm trying to say, I want them to feel the emotion that I felt in the past. And so I think that really grounds it and puts you in a state to understand, like, hey, like, here's the way he felt then, here's the way he feels now, here's the way he will feel soon. And also for me, my emotions are key because, I remember a motivational speaker once said that emotion is energy in motion. And the way you feel about something, man, it guides your life. It's so important. Like if you feel bad and you feel with anxiety and depression and you're angry, man, I got news for you. The next few weeks of your life are going to be rough. Like you're going to attract some things into your life that are not going to be pleasant because you attract the way you feel. And so it's important to learn like what these emotions feel like, and being able to share that with people through stories, then also will, in my belief, will allow them to be able to shift those emotions from that negative emotion to a positive emotion. Because, through life, through all the storms and the walls and the roadblocks that we face, the only thing we can control is the way we react to it and the way we feel about it. And so I think that, man, emotions for me are just so important, and while a lot of times I do have to be screamed at to follow certain signs, right? Like I got to see the same thing over and over and over again. The first language that the universe always sends you is emotional. It's always
Yeah.
the way you feel about something. And so if you can come in tune with those emotions, man, it changes everything. And so I think that when you deliver that in a story to someone, you connect on a deeper level than just the words, that come out of your mouth.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's so important what you said about projecting the same emotion that you want to create in the end, because I think
Mm,
that's where a lot of people actually go wrong, because they're coming from a place of lack and
mhm,
fear, and they are trying to create
mhm,
abundance and joy, and it just doesn't match, because they still have the wrong filter, right?
mhm.
So they are not
Absolutely.
seeing the signs. And that's what's making it so difficult. Now, is there anything else that you would like to share with our audience today?
I think that what I try to do when I wake up each morning, especially if I'm not feeling great, because, I have bad days and you always will, I always try to reflect on myself and just try to understand, you know, am I where I'm supposed to be? And that doesn't always mean where I want to be or where I'm going, but am I where I'm supposed to be today, right now? And if I am, it makes me feel better. And I try to start my day off feeling great, because if I don't feel great at the beginning of the day, it is not going to be a good day. And so I would just encourage everyone to take that time to decide what your goals are and feel good about where you are now, knowing that all it takes is taking one step each day towards your path of success, whatever that may mean for you. Success in business, relationships, success in life, friendships. It could be money, it could be spirituality, it could be anything, whatever success means for you. But if you just choose to write your mind when you wake up and take one step, not 10, just one, if you just commit to one, man, you'll find in a year's time the progress that you have made, it will fuel you to keep going forward. And for those that may be looking for a little bit of extra help, I have a text message line that people can text where you can get direct access to me. It's totally free. Where you can connect with me. I send out motivational text messages for people just to kind of get you going throughout the week. And people can reach me directly for that at +1 314 789 9005.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And where else can listeners connect with you online? Like, what's your favorite
Yeah.
platform?
So, my probably Instagram, but you can reach me on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. Everything is at Akeem Shannon, Akeem Shannon, Shannon. And if you're interested in getting a flip stick, you can check out Flipstick at Get Flipstick. And stick has no C in stick, so STIK. So at Get Flipstick, it's available also, of course, on Amazon as well as on our website and a number of other retailers as well too.
Fantastic. Akeem, thank you so much for talking today. This was so much fun. It's really been a pleasure having you on the show.
It's been a pleasure being on the show, Claudia. Thank you so much.
Take care and talk soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to the Wired for Success podcast. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. That's a fantastic, easy, and zero-cost way to help the show grow. Just use the link in the show notes and make my day. Want more? For quick, actionable tips and insights to guided meditations and a side of biohacking, join my inner circle and get access to exclusive subscriber-only content. Again, just use the link in the show notes to join the tribe. Thank you for your support and see you on the other side. Take care and talk soon. Bye.